Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. We are on chapter 9. So, chapter 9 is an incredibly important chapter, especially for a social media analysis essay. So, the vocabulary words most specifically definitely apply. So, yes, I've told you before, I'm very much vocabulary word heavy in this particular class. And there's a reason for that, because understanding the definitions is a huge part of understanding the ways in which we think and the way in which we do the things that we do. Okay, so that being the case, on the second page of the PowerPoint are going to be all the vocabulary terms we're going to be using for this particular chapter. Make sure that you feel comfortable in using them and understanding how each and every one of those works. I do notice sometimes in some of either the assignments or the responses, sometimes words are just kind of thrown in there like haphazardly, as if you're just like, I have to use a word, so I'm going to put it in there. Don't do that to yourself, and don't do that to me. So please go through and make sure that you really understand what these terms mean and how you would use them correctly. Okay, so best way to do that is one, watch the video all the way through, go through the PowerPoint and double check in the book. Okay, any way that you can find, like again, we're in critical thinking class. You can go beyond just me to really understand what these words mean, but make sure you kind of come back to what I'm talking about in this class to make sure that we're on the same page, because sometimes you might find a definition somewhere else isn't quite right with what it is that we're doing in class. So just keep that in mind. Anyway, all right, so I'm going to go through really quick what our vocabulary terms are, and you might notice that some I will give a little bit more emphasis on or time in discussion versus others, but do note that is not a determining factor on how important these terms are. Some are just a little bit easier to grasp versus others, and so they might not need as much time, okay? All right, so vocabulary words, and then we're going to get into the chapter. So ethnocentrism, sorry about that, fair-mindedness, egocentrism, defense mechanism, rationalization, yes, we did use those in chapter 2, we're going to come back to it, cognitive dissonance, denial, conformity, groupthink, emotional reasoning, mind reading, filtering, personalizing, and active listening. Okay? All right, so again, let's get to it so that we know exactly what we're working with here in chapter 9. And again, make sure you feel really comfortable with this chapter, because for this social media analysis essay, the idea here is really kind of understanding one, not just how to be a critical thinker, but how to understand where other people might be coming from in their point of view or their discussion, or why they might have certain reactions to certain conversations. Okay? All right, so I'm going to throw out a few questions here. And I know that we are interacting via a video, but I would like you to take a minute and actually utilize these questions and understand exactly where you think your mindset might be on some of these. So the first question I want to ask to you, in your opinion, is what is open-mindedness? What do you think, or what do you know open-mindedness to be? All right, what is open-mindedness? So take a minute, you can pause me and kind of think about that, okay? Now, another question is, how are critical thinking and fair-mindedness related? So how is critical thinking and fair-mindedness related? How do they coincide? Okay. Now, why is being open to fair-mindedness, remember, fair-mindedness, okay, how is being open to fair-mindedness more important now than ever? Okay, so again, what do you think fair-mindedness is? Not open-mindedness, but fair-mindedness, okay? All right, and so what is the difference between an individual perspective and a group perspective? So you might be going, oh, well, they're pretty much the same. And in a sense, no. We'll go through, I'm going to explain it a little bit better for you. So, all right, so what are some examples of things we see from an individual perspective? So whether it's our own health, our own success, our desires for things. So you might kind of be thinking, well, actually, those two do have a correlation. They do. We'll get there in just one second. So again, so what are some examples of things that we see in an individual perspective? What are things that we think about as an individual? Now, who makes the decisions about these things? Do you make decisions about your own health, your success, or your desire for things? All right, do you? That's a good question to ask. So, what are some of the groups that we identify with, from maybe smaller to larger? Okay, so when we're making decisions and viewing the world, dealing with others, do we tend to see things from our own perspective first, or from a group perspective. All right, so let's see. That might all depend on maybe the decision that we're trying to make. All right, so when babies are born, they have nothing but their own perspective. Like, they're a baby. All they know is what's in front of them, which is them. Okay, so a baby has just its own perspective. But my question to you is, when do we start developing an outside perspective? When do we as individuals start thinking about outside perspective? What do you think are some influences? So, a question here is, think of some issues you've dealt with from a group perspective. Okay, so when you start thinking, when did we start thinking this way? Start to think, what are some issues? So maybe deciding where to live, how to pay for like a road trip, maybe certain bond measures, right? Election stuff, whether or not pot should be legal in a state. Chief among these is like sheltering in place during the virus, right? So we're deciding on issues from a group perspective. So who tends to make these decisions? Okay, when we think of these group, perspective, who's making these decisions? So, are you decisive or amenable? Okay, and amenable, it means, are you going along with others, to decide? So, does the size of a group determine how decisive or amenable you are? So, is it the group size or is there something else? So, there's some issues and problems in our society that absolutely must be dealt with from a group perspective. There's some things that as a group we have to come to a whole consensus. Okay, so one of them is climate change, right? So one individual can't change the world individually on their own. They have to get a group perspective on this to really take forth the next step and go, what do I need to do to make the change? What is it we have to do? Because it's a we thing. Okay, so one thing is that the ocean's fish population is now at a very critical level. It's actually really bad, and so we have to ask, and from a group perspective, do we ask Indonesia trawlers, who are operating maybe 5 miles from our coast, should we ask them, hey, you can't do this anymore? Or, what's the next decision? We might have to consider immigration across the world. All right, that's from a group perspective. And then, like approaches to the contagious diseases like, coronavirus before it was HIV, as we saw from that video. So different ways in which we handle that as a group. We have to come to a consensus. It's kind of like washing your hands when you leave a bathroom. At some point, it is an individual choice to do the thing they are going to do. But for a whole, we have to say, well, maybe from a group perspective, it's a good idea to wash your hands when you leave the restroom. Okay, so the Ganges River, it was one of the largest in the world. It does flow into several different countries, and the question would be, what happens if how the upstream affects everyone downstream? Okay, so if you go to the what do you call it? The PowerPoint, you'll see there's actually a really nice little article on there that you can take a look at. And you can maybe even use that as a debate topic with your partner. So you can use that as well and take a look at that and kind of see, from here, at what point do we say, all right, y'all up here in the front stream are really messing us up for the downstream, and who makes that decision on individual actions that we need to have maybe changed, maybe ways in which we do something different. Okay. All right. So do you think of other examples maybe? Maybe there's some other examples that you could think of where we would need a group consensus to really come to an answer to solve some problems. All right. And so can one person make the decision about these things? Can one person? All right. In a sense, like one person can make a decision, but unfortunately, it takes a group perspective to try and figure out what's the best answer to come to a solution. Okay. All right. So, do we have individual opinions about these things? Of course we do. We always have individual opinions. America is wrought with individual opinions. It's, what we were founded on, right? So, let's talk about ethnocentrism. So ethnocentrism is the belief that one's own culture is superior or more important than others. Okay, and some people view the U.S. as superior versus other countries. So why is that? Why might that be? Why might someone partake in ethnocentrism? Okay, so some examples might be maybe propaganda in the media. All right, go America, yeah, it's out there. There's some people who push for it in some ways than others. It's taught in school. We do say, I don't know if y'all still do that, but when I was in elementary school, we did the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, right? That kind of pushed for the next line, which is pride and patriotism. All right, these things that kind of become a part of society that pushes us to say, go America, we superior, right? And then maybe there's actual good things about our country that give us reason to have pride. Does it give us enough reason to have ethnocentrism, though? All right. So do countries feel the same way about their country? So do other countries have ethnocentrism? Do they feel like they are superior to other countries? Of course. Why wouldn't they? Because that's how we develop as societies. We just say, I'm better, I'm good, everyone at some point has a culture in which they live in that has where they feel more superior than other cultures. It doesn't matter. There's always someone somewhere who always tries to feel better than the other. It's human nature, y'all. All right. And so my question would be, if we're talking about ethocentrism, what are some dangers of this belief that the U.S. is superior? Okay, so if we're going to sit here and claim ethnocentrism and be like, USA, USA, what might be some dangers in having that mindset? So here's some maybes. Maybe, the dangers could be that there's unfair treatment of those of other countries. So people who come in from other countries, or how we look at other countries. And that creates a very dangerous mindset to have that superiority mindset towards other countries or other cultures. An issue might be that we're hoarding about 60% of the world's resources. Yes, America does have control over a lot of different resources. So military domination. So then now we become kind of an authority, that type of, you know, domination of other countries because of our military. And that could create a lot of dangers too, because people might want to be fighting back against that. So outsourcing of pollution. We're huge on that. We claim China has all this pollution, but we're also using them to outsource majority of our products. So during the pandemic in February and January of 2020, there was NASA, they just kind of float around. They're always taking pictures of the Earth. At one point, they took a picture of, how China was looking in January. Well, come the shutdown of pretty much the entire world, China shut down too. Well, China is a huge source of, outsource for especially American products. And so what happened was NASA was taking pictures of the smog of China in January versus February when everything shut down. And if you take a look at it, I actually have a link in the PowerPoint over the information that came from that. So, we're going to say China causes all the pollution, but who are we outsourcing to? That's the United States, right? So we are a huge contributor to the pollution that comes through, unfortunately. So all right, so discriminating against immigrants is a huge issue of being an ethnocentric type of mindset. And then there's probably others. Can you think of other ways in which it is a danger for us to give this ethnocentric type of mindset? Okay, and it's not just countries though, right? So it's not just countries that have this mindset. Ethnocentrism is a tendency to view own race and culture as central, and it diminishes the importance and values of other races and cultures. All right, so ethnocentrism is not just about, loving our country. Sometimes it's about thinking that you're better than other people because of your race or your culture, okay? And so what are some instances where ethnocentrism you might have seen, in addition to the belief that, the United States is the best country? Let's give you a little list here. So the belief that one's own religion is superior. Oh my gosh, you see that so often in pretty much majority of the religions out there, that theirs is better than the others. And that, their claim is that theirs is the path to heaven, or theirs is the path to, whatever. That is a part of ethnocentrism, to say that my religion is the best religion and my religion is going to literally save your soul. Okay. So the problem with that is resulting in the persecution of those who believe differently. So if you believe differently from this other religion, you're instantly going straight to hell. From my from my experience from my family members who were very religious, that was one of their literal lines. If you don't believe in what we're believing, then you're pretty much going to hell. And it's like, oh my God. And then so when you have that mindset, you're just like, I guess I have to believe. I don't want to go to hell. All right, and we're gonna talk about that in a little bit, about how certain groupthink creates this mindset. Okay, so also religions do create discrimination against those of other races. Okay, so unfortunately, belief does create the superiority complex, which does again discriminate, persecutes, and a lot of times there's a subjugation of women. All right, unfortunately, women do get kind of the bulk on that too when it comes to certain religions. So also slavery, right? So a person who is the legal property of another and is forced to obey them. Okay, so beliefs that one's religion is superior. See how that developed into slavery at some point. Manifest destiny. We are better. We do this. So, you're not of us, so you are of them, and unfortunately became the thought process that certain people aren't really people. Okay, so that's just how religion has come forth. And that's not just then, that could be now too. This is like across the board in humanity since the existence or the development of religion and beliefs. Okay, all right, so belief that one state is better than other states. So I am partial to California. I don't know why. We're kind of in a hole right now. If you look at us financially, there's a housing crisis and unemployment rate. Like, when you really think about it, it's not the greatest state, but it's the state that I love and that I choose to live in because I love it. Right. I believe it to be a progressive state and that pushes, equal rights. And that's what I thought when I lived in LA. And then I moved to Northern California and I see an incredible amount of conservative thought, which kind of shook me a little bit because I had a reality assumption about California, about what I thought California to be from when I, moved down to Southern California, and the things that I learned working in the university at UCLA. I just thought I had a preconceived, reality assumption of what I thought California was to be. So my question is, was my reality assumption true? My reality assumption of what I believe California to be is be progressive and, is it true? And even if it is correct, and even if that was, my mindset, is there danger involved in that thinking? And absolutely, absolutely, especially moving into Northern California. And it's just a more conservative view out here. And as an English major and critical thinking teacher, my mindset was a little bit different than what most of my students were, and that created kind of a little bit of a chaos because I wasn't anticipating that. And so yeah, that developed a little bit of problem. I had to change, both my mindset and the way in which I approach teaching because of that, which it's not a bad thing at all. It was just just kind of a little shock to my system when I had a preconceived or a reality assumption of what I thought California to be. So yes, my egocentrism about California is the best, and then does that cause danger? Absolutely, because that kind of closes me off to what really is out and about, and how I can communicate with others who might have a different mindset. All right. So what's the problem with ethnocentrism? What is the problem with it? Why is it bad to love the country? Like, I can love my country, I can love my state, I can love my religion, right? I can love, my culture and feel superior, right? Well, let's think about that. Fair decisions cannot be made if you think you are superior. That's the answer right there. You cannot have a fair decision if you're sitting here thinking you're superior. And obviously, if you're thinking you're superior, then it's an instantly not fair-minded point of view. It's not a fair-minded thought process. You're not thinking of others. You're purely thinking of yourself. All right. So fair-mindedness, we're going to get to that now. It's a trait used by critical thinkers that involves the following things. We have, as a fair-minded person, you have respect for others, willingness to actually hear and understand different viewpoints on an issue. And that's sometimes hard to do. We'll talk about that in a second. And an open-mindedness to change when new information warrants it. Okay, so fair-mindedness is the willingness to change when the evidence proves that your your point of view is actually not correct, right? And then, do you know anyone who is fair-minded? Right? Do you know anyone who's actually fair-minded? When you talk with them, they actually have respect for you. They, even if there's someone who's way out there, they actually respect that point of view. Someone who's willing to understand and listen, and someone who has an open-mindedness to change their thought process if more information is handed to them. Who do you know? All right. Who do you know? And do you admire those people? Do you acknowledge them? And how do they act? Is this something that you're like, dang, man, that's pretty cool. I want to be that way. All right. All right. So ethnocentrism is the tendency to view, oops, let's see here. That's the wrong one. Sorry, my thing went the wrong way. Sorry. All right. So what's the problem with ethnocentrism? Whoops. I'm going the wrong direction. I'm sorry, y'all. Okay. My bad. So in opposition to ethnocentrism, which is the bigger version, we're going to go a little bit smaller, and we're going to talk about egocentric. All right. Egocentrism is the individual version. So before, we're thinking about my race, my culture, my country, my state. Oh, so great. I'm so superior. Well, now let's bring it back down to the actual individual person, which is egocentrism. And this is the belief that everything revolves around that individual person. Everything is me, 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 me. Literally everything. So their desires, their values, their beliefs, and their action must always be considered correct and superior in order to preserve their ego. So when you are egocentric, it's all about you, everything you say, do, and believe is going to be right. Let's be honest. I can't think of one human being in the world where it is the case where everything they believe, value, and desire has always, in their lifetime, has always been true, right? So at some point, someone somewhere will like, oh, that's not right. Maybe I'm gonna have to change my point of view in order to be respectful and open-minded to others. Okay, so egocentrism is not a really good place to be. Okay, so as an extreme example, it would be people who put themselves in the center of almost everything, right? Like right in the middle, it's like all about me. So, and we know egotistic people. We know these people. We've met them. Maybe we have been them. Maybe we still are them. All right. And these people tend to dominate, whether it's in a class or, at family gatherings. And that's not a good thing. That's not a type of personality where you're like, oh, when they come in, it's so happy we see them. It's the kind of person whose personality is like, it's all about me. How can you guys not see it's about me? Right. And so that's egocentrism, just someone who is so self-involved that they start to not see other people or how their actions might be hurting other people. And that's a big thing to consider. So when does egotistic step over the line to egocentric, right? We have egotistical versus egocentric. So children who don't learn to share by a certain age, maybe that's, egocentric. Girls who steal each other's boyfriends might be an example, or people who argue for their opinion regardless of the facts or the examples, and they just won't listen. Or maybe guys in Hollywood who think that, they can use women. These are egocentric types of people. So one thing to consider would be the producer, Harvey Weinstein. I don't know if any of y'all remember this. And it was a guy who was doing all kinds of foul stuff as a Hollywood director. The question is he egocentric or is he a sociopath? And keep in mind, I'm going to give you a quick definition of sociopath. It is not psychopath. It is sociopath. It is a social issue, right? So a person whose personality disorder manifests itself into an extreme antisocial behavior, and the behavior usually lacks conscious, like a lack of conscious, like moral values usually is where we're going with that. All right. And so do you know anyone who's egocentric? And who is that person? Describe them. I will be honest, I have been that person. Absolutely, to the core, I have been that person. And it was not a good place to be. And I learned a lot. And I saw a lot of things that I was doing. And I was the person stealing friends' boyfriends. Yeah. It's not that bad, but it's kind of that bad. It wasn't good. And, people who would, I'd argue my opinion regardless of facts. Just, it wasn't a pretty place to be. And it took some tough love and hard learning to realize what I was doing was actually hurting other people. At the time, I was so egocentric and so self-involved, I didn't realize what I was doing to other people. And that's the problem when you're egocentric. You don't realize there's other people out there because you're so, got the horse blinders on, so set in your own way. So think about someone who you might consider to be egocentric. Okay, think about someone. Take a minute, you can pause me, and then think, who is that person? And I want you to to kind of think of maybe some traits that make you feel that that's who they might be. So I'm going to give you a person. Don't freak out when I give you this person. But I think is the best example because of the way in which they would present themselves. So that's kind of how they would come off. So my question to you would be, the person I'm about to describe, would you consider them egocentric, egotistic, or maybe even a sociopath? Again, a sociopath is just someone who has antisocial behavior because they're so self-involved. So the person at hand would be Donald Trump. Okay. And some of you are like, oh, why would you do that? Just relax. So the reason why I say this is because the way he would present himself came off in a sense of both egocentric and egotistic, and maybe even sociopathic, right? Antisocial because they were so self-involved. This is just an example, because my question then would be, was it Trump himself, like President Trump, or was it all presidents? Maybe all presidents have to be egocentric. Maybe you need to be in order to get to that level, right? So self-involved, how can you become that next level? I don't know. That's a great question to ask. This is just an example. Or maybe we only elect people who have powerful egos. Maybe we need that as a society. Maybe we have been taught that that's what we have to how do I say this? Maybe this is the way in which we have to put it out there so that we sorry, I have a text came through on my phone and I lost my train of thought. Sorry. I'll go back to that. Maybe we only elect people with powerful egos because as a society, that is what we feel is strong. Maybe we see that as a way of power to be egocentric. I don't know, because we let people with egocentric personalities dominate us and change the way we think, right? Whether or not we believe them, we follow suit. All right, so that's a good question to ask. So my question then would be to ask you, is the following egocentrism? I've known people whose happiness is strongly rooted in their sports team. And when their team loses, they throw a big fit and they're kind of a cranky pants for a little bit. And you're like, bruh, it's just a game. Chill. Right? But for them, that's ego, that's their own world. Maybe people who took it personally when they got a speeding ticket and they blame the cop, even though they're the ones who were driving over the speed limit, right? They blame others for their mistakes. Is that egocentrism? Right. So students who maybe demand that I change their grade from a D or an F to something better because, they said that they needed a better grade, even though they didn't earn it. So you do have to earn your grade. Just because you turned in an assignment does not mean you automatically get a grade. You do have to do the work the way in which we require you to do it to show me that you learned the topic. Okay, so just as a heads up, if anyone's ever tried to get a grade changed, there's usually a reason why you might have a D or an F. Something wasn't turned in or done right. Okay, that's just nature of the beast, guys. I gotta grade you. Okay, so is it egocentrism to say that just because you did the work that you are owed something? Okay, and then colleagues maybe who they don't deal well with an argument in a meeting and they take it personal. Okay, examples. All right. So in the case of people who don't wait in line or refuse to take a failing grade, I like to define that maybe as arrogant, right? So maybe it's a type of arrogance that they feel like they might deserve something, right? They don't like, I remember during the pandemic, people just would refuse to wait in line. Like, I don't have to wait in line. I just want to get it and go because I didn't want to be out. I'm like, well, then why are you out? All right. Or so my definition of arrogant might be someone who believes the rules don't apply to them. Now, is that arrogant or egocentrism? That's the question to ask. All right. So my examples would include people like recreational shoplifters or people who drive like assholes. Let's be honest. They're just passing through traffic about 20 miles faster than the other person. I'm sure I've done that too. Again, I've partaken in many egocentric behaviors. Maybe cheaters, people who steal your barbecue from your deck. It's been known to happen. And I'm sure you've got your own examples of ways in which people might be arrogant, right? Is it arrogance? Or is it on the borderline of being egocentric? That's a good question to ask. So these are things I want you to kind of start to be more mindful of, be aware of what's out there. So egocentrism, it's an absolute block to critical thinking. When you're so egocentric, you can't think of anyone else. My dears, that is the absolute opposite of critical thinking. Okay, so to be more logical and more fair and less egocentric, we can focus on developing some beautiful skills. All right. So, one of the things I want you to be able to develop is recognizing the defense mechanisms that we use. Okay. When we're egocentric, we start to freak out when something is different than what we choose to believe true or hold very, to our hearts. All right. So, recognize when I'll talk about defense mechanisms in a second, when start to recognize what they are. All right, and then acknowledge our own areas of thinking where we aren't being rational. Remember, in previous chapters, we've talked about being emotional. If you're having an emotional reaction, most likely you are not having a logical reaction, which means you're not going to have a logical response. Okay, and then it's also important that we develop empathy for the viewpoints of others. You may not have the same belief or might not feel the same way, but it's important to have empathy for the ways in which someone else might think. Again, when we talked about Butterfly Hill, the girl who would climb the redwood tree, and the people who were cutting down the tree, it's important to have empathy on both sides to truly understand their viewpoints. So, why is this super important? Why is it super important to be logical and fair? Because, first and most simply, we're a lot more persuasive when we show respect and courtesy to those we disagree with. I mean, yeah, sure, it's a form of manipulation, but at the same time, when we show people like that, we respect them and we respect their opinion, it's going to be a lot more persuasive. People are going to go, oh, you're actually listening to me. Yeah, I'm listening to you. And when you feel heard, then you're willing to listen to the other side because it's like, you see my point. So if you can see my point and you're arguing this, maybe you have a point. Or not. That's not always the case. But at the same time, it's important that you listen to both sides and have empathy, empathizing with somebody else. Okay. So we defend and protect our egos with defense mechanisms. Let's get into the nice, wonderful defense mechanisms. Okay. And defense mechanisms are those techniques that help us to avoid unpleasant realities. Okay. We have defense mechanisms for many reasons, and a lot of it's because we just don't want to be uncomfortable. Okay. All right. Chapter 2. On chapter 2, you recall we covered rationalizations. And rationalizations is a defense mechanism where we come up with a seemingly good reason, remember, a good reason for why we do the things that we do. Go back to the chapter 2 and take a look at those, because remember, we're justifying ourselves and we're making excuses to explain away the actions or behaviors that, probably should be examined more closely. Okay, so when we're explaining away something, it's because we don't want to face the truth. And that's the truth. Okay, and that's why people rationalize. Rationalization is not necessarily a good thing. Okay, so go back to chapter 2 on 51 and 52 to look at the different ways in which we rationalize. Remember, we've already covered that. And then on examples on page 403, ta-ta-ta! Chapters 4, page 403, I want you to look at the examples of rationalizations and then go back on 51 and 52, and I want you to fit the type of rationalization that is being used in those examples. So I'd like you to pause me here. Okay, you're probably not going to pause me, but pause me and then go through. And I would like you to apply the two things and kind of get really a good understanding of rationalizations, because you can use those rationalizations in your categories for your social media analysis paper. Okay, when you start to see the way in which people are rationalizing either their example or the reasoning behind why they said what they said, or doing the defense mechanism, you should be able to see that and go, ah, dang, I see what they're doing there, and be able to recognize it. And that's the biggest point, is recognizing it when you're seeing it. And especially I would love to see that in your social analysis paper. Show me where you're seeing rationalizations. Give me examples of them. Where are you seeing these take place from people who are commenting because they're having, again, a defense mechanism to something being said. All right. So another defense mechanism is cognitive dissonance. Okay, cognitive dissonance kind of runs on a spectrum of different ways you can see this or acknowledge it. And I'm going to give you kind of a quick definition. I'm going to show you some examples. Try not to get too confused with the extreme examples I'm going to give you, but just understand that cognitive dissonance is where, we'll wall off competing beliefs or thoughts. So one thing doesn't really match the other when it comes to cognitive dissonance. Okay, so sometimes, again, we're putting up a wall where there's competing beliefs and thoughts that leave us in a state of tension and anxiety, as a result of what we might be saying and doing. Okay, so this occurs when our behaviors, what we're doing, is inconsistent with our beliefs. So cognitive dissonance could be something as simple as, I love little piggies, they're adorable, I don't think they should be in factory farms. All right, so I believe that, but my actions are, I love bacon, I eat bacon. Okay, so one side of me, which is creating anxiety, is that it's incredibly sad that there's these factory, farms with these little piggies, and they're adorable and they're incredibly smart, actually, and yet I love bacon. Right, so that's cognitive dissonance, where there's this one thing that I believe, but then here's my action. Okay, and this kind of goes on different perspective, different spectrums, and I'll give you some examples. Hopefully, it doesn't confuse you too much. But just as an example, right? I put a meme in the PowerPoint. Take a look. That gives you another a definition of it. So the reason why we're having issues with why cognitive dissonance causes issues is because their beliefs are challenged with their actions. Okay, so the meme here, I'll give you kind of the definition, is the mental conflict that occurs when the beliefs are contradicted with new information. This is where we have cognitive dissonance. The conflict activates areas of the brain involved with the personal identity or emotion, right? I believe that the piggies should just, have a good life, and that's my belief, and I love all animals, and I don't ever like the idea of them being slaughtered, but yet I do something else that contradicts that. Okay, all right, so when your personal identity and emotional response to threats is kind of changed. So the brain's alarms go off when a person feels threatened on a deeply personal level, and it causes them to shut down and disregard any evidence otherwise, right? So the cognitive dissidence for me would be, I just pretend over here that the piggies, like I love them, but then I forget that they're being slaughtered over here. That's the cognitive difference. It's two different mindsets. Okay, so hopefully it doesn't confuse you too much. It's tough with the meme because the meme kind of throws it off a little bit, but it gives you that idea of, one thing that I believe versus one thing that threatens that belief, but it's also something I partake in, right? So the eating of the pigs really threatens the fact that I love them, and this is causing me a lot of stress because I don't want to eat them, but it's so good. Okay, so I'll give you some kind of extreme versions of this where cognitive dissonance sometimes is like PTSD. So a soldier returning from battle, where he's traumatically seen civilians killed in a foreign street, he might have trouble not reacting when he hears like a car backfire. Okay, so there's this cognitive dissonance of what he believes to be true versus what has happened before, right? This reaction. So PTSD is kind of an extreme version of a cognitive dissonance, right? So if you have anyone who who might have that, it could be an extreme version. It could be a very small version of it. People from the campfire I've seen have certain reactions to things, right? And so it can result from all kinds of different traumas, right? So maybe being abused can cause it. So how can this result from cognitive dissonance, right? So PTSD can cause from that. So an example would be a kid expected to act as if everything's okay at school, but then when they go home, they know they might be physically or mentally abused. So my cognitive dissonance was, as a child, I was molested by, like a family member. And the problem was always having to go to said family member's house and pretending like everything was okay. And that was really hard for me. And it created a lot of anxiety and really kind of messed with me because what I believed to be true versus what I was, partaking in was really, really hard. So that kind of created a bit of, PTSD for me as well. So you might have other examples. Again, this is a little on the extreme side, but again, it's one side that is not in congruence with the other side of either what you're believing versus what you're partaking in. Okay. So can cognitive dissonance affect our critical thinking? Yeah, absolutely. So if you've been raised to believe one thing your whole life, like this is true and only true, and then you're exposed to information that is contradictory to it, what do you do? Like, how do you react to that when you've been told one way your whole life, and then you see truth and facts and things that are contrary to that, like literally contradicts it? How do you react? What do you do to it? So an example would be like the abolitionists in the 1800s. They argued that black slaves were, in fact, in every single way, human beings. They were people. So the abolitionists were like, dude, these are people. We must see them as people. And it contradicted what slave owners and the whole time had been thinking, which was they're not people. And so it was really hard. Like, how did white slave owners deal with this claim for them to say, oh, what do you mean slaves are people? Right? So this is when you get those rationalizations, right? And, they would justify reasons why they would be continuing to, own slaves. And so they would seek and create information that confirmed their own beliefs and ignored the explained way, ignored and explained away the information that was contrary to their own beliefs, right? So they were in denial, right? We'll talk about denial in a second. All right, so knowing on this side that slaves were people, but wanting, again, the bacon, and wanting the slaves created this cognitive dissonance where the truth is slavery is, bad and wrong. These people are human, but I still want my slaves, right? So this is where that cognitive dissonance comes in. I hope that's helping you in some way. I don't know if this is weird, but I hope you can kind of see those two different sides to it. So again, that's a prime example of cognitive dissonance, not wanting to believe the truth, but wanting what you want because it's easier for you and it's hard to accept the truth in some ways. So another example would be saying that you care about the environment, but then you can continue to use plastic containers and drive a gas guzzling car, and you eat a lot of meat. Yes, meat does contribute a lot, which is very hard on the environment. Okay. So many of us put these contradictions out of our minds, right? We try and pretend it doesn't exist. We tell ourselves, tell ourselves it's not a big deal. I'll deal with it later. But on some level, we know that dealing with it later is not going to be the answer. It needs to be handled now. And it creates an underlying guilt that is always there. Right. So I love my friend I have known this girl 20 years, no, 30 years now, like best friend in the whole world. And she sends me gifts. We just mail each other back and forth because she's in Kansas. And she'll send me these things with little plastic pieces, like those little Kinder toys. Half of it's candy and the other half is a plastic toy. And I'm looking at this going, this is the most worthless piece of plastic. It is destroying the environment. Why? Why are you doing this to me? I know that that's destroying the environment, but I love my friends so much and I like gifts, right? That's definitely killing me right there. That's some cognitive dissonance, right? All right. So what is the result of living with cognitive dissonance? What's some results from that? Dude, stress, anxiety, physical tension, depression, poor sleep, rages, use of drug and alcohol. I don't know if I've mentioned it in class. I am a recovering alcoholic. I'm not blaming my past experiences on it, but my way of handling that cognitive dissonance of, I know that my relative had molested me, but I have to pretend it's not true kind of thing, kind of messed with me, created a lot of anxiety. And somehow at one point I felt that drinking was, quelling said anxiety. It was just creating more in the end. So that's, sometimes we have these, coping mechanisms, and anxiety and stress, these things just become reactions to this cognitive dissonance that happens. Okay. So does everyone have cognitive dissonance? Yes, absolutely. In our society, the things that we do not coincide with most good things. So it just is what it is. And we probably all in some way have some sort of situation where what we know and what we do butts up against each other. Okay, that's just how it is. So sometimes it's a result of poverty, like, oh, I can't afford all these, environmentally healthy things. So I'm just going to keep doing what I've been doing because it's what I can afford. Right? Or maybe some other factor that keeps us from changing our thoughts to match our actions. Though I do make sure when I'm giving gifts, I don't give things that are going to end up in the trash. I'll give food, things that we can use, but not plastic. I try and avoid plastic. So, all right. Anyway, in an environmentalism, like an environmental example, we have Julia Butterfly Hill. We were talking about her earlier. So she lived in the Redwood for 2 years. So my question is, what is congruence? Congruence is where there are where people's beliefs conform to their actions. So when we're talking about cognitive dissidence, our beliefs are not conforming to our actions. But there are some people like Julia Butterfly Hill whose actions really truly did conform to her actions. She lived in a tree for 2 years because that's how convicted she was. You know, she was very congruent with her beliefs and her actions. She believed a thing and she did it. Okay, so environmentally, these might be vegans, people who reject the consumer lifestyle. That is living congruently, right? Living with congruence, because your beliefs align with your actions. Okay, Mother Teresa is a huge example. She gave up a comfortable lifestyle to minister to the poorest of people in India, right? And so that is definitely an example of congruence. I myself, I don't know if I could do that. I don't know. And I am very egocentric in that way. I want what I want. I want to live my life the way I want it. I don't know if I could actually live the way Mother Teresa did, where she gave up everything for her beliefs and she showed it through her actions. Okay. So environmentally, there are people who genuinely believe that the environment is going to be fine. There's some people who actually truly say, look, man, environment's fine. I don't have to do anything about it. And that's congruent to, if it were true, you know, their actions, right? So if you don't believe there's anything wrong with the environment and you don't do anything about it, well, then you're congruent with your thoughts. But the difference here is, are you living so congruent with your beliefs they're not willing to listen to the truth that's coming out, right? So are you you are living in congruence when you say, oh, there's nothing wrong with the environment, so you do nothing to change it, right? But when you start to hear more information, at what point does that start to give you that cognitive dissonance to where you know one thing but you do another? Okay, sorry, this is going to be a long one, y'all, and I'm kind of over talking this so much, but we're going to keep going because this is really important. All right, so a lot of this doesn't have to do with just holding environment. It could be about politics and wars and laws and the treatment of minorities and women, etc. Anything where what we were doing, anything where what is happening socially may be at odds with what we go about our lives. Okay, so what's happening socially? How are we behaving in regards to that? That's when we start developing a lot of social dissonance because we're not following what we know to be true. Okay. So do you know anyone else whose beliefs and actions are congruent? Is it possible? Is there somebody out there who actually does live the way in which they believe? Like they actually have the actions? All right. So I'm curious to know who really truly does that. There are a lot of people and there are a lot of people who don't do that, right? So is there in some way in which you've tried to become more congruent? I try very, very, very hard to do that. And the more and more I teach, the more and more I try and gather more information and try and be as fair-minded as possible. It is really hard. I am only a human. I've only lived so much life. I don't know all things, but I do try to live as congruent as I can. Unfortunately, environmentally, I don't. And I admit that, and it hurts my feelings. So some ways that I try and be more congruent is one, I don't let my car idle. An idling car is really just not good for the environment at all. I hate drive-throughs. I've definitely partaken in them very many times. Yeah. Anyway, so I definitely don't buy bottled water. I try and avoid plastic bottles as best as possible. It's really hard to do. It is very hard to do to avoid packaging. Packaging is a huge contributor to the environment and the destruction of the environment, especially when it ends up in the oceans and all little fishies and everything eat those little microplastics that now become something that we eat. So if you want to be egocentric, in the end, it does affect us. Okay, so I try and use environmentally safe feminine products. Sometimes I'm better than I am on other days. It's tough. It is really tough sometimes to change the habits that we've been into. And I'm kind of hoping maybe you have some examples too in ways in which you have lived in congruence, and it's hard. So for some people, rather than developing congruence, some people deal with cognitive dissonance through denial, absolute sheer denial. So denial is a state of mind that blocks critical thinking by refusing to accept facts or evidence and rejecting information that threatens the choices that have been made. So denial is saying, nope, don't care, right? So they don't want to hear any of the evidence. They don't want to hear anything. They just want to reject all of it and say, nope, All right. And that's pure denial. And do you know anyone who's in denial about what's going on in the world, whether it's the virus or the election results or, the environment, falling apart as it is? So do we know people? Are you one? And that's fine. These are things that we have to be mindful of. What am I in denial of? What are things that I go, oh, I just don't even want to think about it. Right. And again, one of them is the slaughtering of little baby piggies. Okay. I'm in denial because I don't want to admit that it's not good for the environment and I'm partaking in that. Okay. So, one thing I really need you to do, okay, is watch the video on this next slide. So, I do have it up on the module as well. And it's called You're Not Going to Believe What I'm About to Tell You. Okay. So, you can pause me, take a break. I've been going on for about an hour. I know it's a little bit hard. You might have to pause, take a break, go get something to drink, come back, maybe watch that little video. It's a cartoon. It's going to be kind of fun, and see if it gives you a little bit more perspective. Okay. All right. So I am going to keep going. Oops. Sorry. It's actually playing right now. Sorry. So on my next slide, here we go. Here we go. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's just keep going. Okay, so now that you've paused and you've come back, let's keep going. If you were to draw your own house or fortress, if you were to draw if your own little fortress and your own little house, what would it look like? And how would you label the walls and the roof? Okay, if you're going to put a little space between you and everything out there, what would it look like and how would you have it? And that wall would be ideas. Okay, what kind of ideas and the roof and everything put together that makes you who you are and how you believe, what would it look like? And what ideas do you hold true and keeps you safe? Okay, build that little wall. What are some ideas and thoughts and beliefs that you have you in your own little world? Okay, so here are a couple of new concepts that I personally didn't feel comfortable with letting go or into my quote unquote brain fortress. The things that I believed and I held really true. I didn't want to let anything in. And then I had to stop and go, you know what? This brain fortress is actually keeping me from being a critical thinker. Okay, and one of them was I don't know if you remember Kavanaugh. He was voted into the Supreme Court justices. And I didn't want to accept the fact that maybe he didn't do it. Maybe he didn't, aggressively attack that woman. Maybe it's true, maybe he didn't, maybe it was not what was said. And I always seem to tend to lean towards the victim when it comes to sexual assault. And so maybe it's true, maybe he actually didn't do it, and that's really hard for me to accept, and I don't know why. And I think it's because, again, I always fall on the side of the victim. Now, I also have a hard time accepting that my parents probably lived a very similar life to me. Right? My parents dated other people. They had sex. They did things that as human beings, I don't want to see that. I don't want to know that. I don't want to know that my parents are human. They're just my parents, right? And I have a hard time accepting that. Okay? And maybe you have some yourself, or you just kind of go, I have a hard time accepting what's really happened. I live in that mind of denial. That's what that little house is, that house of denial, where I don't want to let anything, I don't want to change my mindset. I don't want to be wrong, right? And that's usually where that comes from, very egotistical. Okay. All right. So rationalizing and denial, they destroy your peace of mind. When you're constantly trying to deny what's happening and you're trying to rationalize everything that's going on around you, at some point you can't even think straight because you're so busy trying to deny what's really around you. And it really doesn't help you. All right. And so rationalizing and denial, they undermine our ability to think critically about issues, especially if we refuse to address these issues, right? So if you're denying them and you're trying to rationalize your way out of them, you're not a critical thinker. You're literally just saying, I don't care. I'm just going to stay in this little mindset. And I can't say I haven't had moments where I was there, but we have to push past that. Okay. So I once had a student in one of my classes a couple years ago who he denied the research and experience of the students that literally were in front of him going, this is the facts. These are the things I've lived. And this is the literal research that we have done. And the student stood in front of class and was pushing some random agenda with no facts, nothing but an emotional reaction in front of the entire class that was just completely racist and bigoted. And we were all just like, whoa. Where did this come from? Especially after the other students had spent so much time researching and sharing their experience, for someone to stand up there as if they never even heard a word anyone else said and was just racist. And, you're just like, where did this come from? Right? That his his inability to hear what anyone else had to say was like shocking. And of course we were like, we heard the topic. We're like, okay, let's see where he's going with this. And it went nowhere. It was like, I say he, she, whatever. They just went on this completely random tangent that had no backing whatsoever. And it was complete denial of the facts that were like given to them in the first place. Okay. So that right there is how, and it affected the rest of the students because it was incredibly offensive and completely disrespectful for everything that everyone in the rest of the class had been pushing and doing and researching. So there was that. You probably have your own example of someone who wanted to cover up their ears to fair-mindedness, and they didn't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. And what's that reaction? Why? Why are people, in that state of mind? And sometimes that comes from fear of having to change the way in which you were born into believing. All right. So again, denial, rationalization, they keep us from learning from mistakes and repeating errors in judgment. All right. So when we are in denial and in rationalization, it's literally keeping us from growing and becoming better people. Okay. And realizing that, man, sometimes I make errors in judgment. And if I don't push myself beyond that, then maybe I'm just going to keep making those errors in judgment and kind of make a fool of yourself in front of everyone who's like, well, where are you coming up with this? And making a fool of yourself isn't necessarily like the point of not doing a thing, but really making sure you are mindful of the things that you say and you do. So personal and social tragedies can then follow, right? So in being in denial and being a rationalization, tragedies can follow from that. So maybe like an example for me, my rationalization and denial of this family member who did what they did to me, I had to, consistently deny the fact that it happens just so I could rationalize why I'm even there at their house, when the reality is I should have never been there. But it created, again, anxiety and, trauma for me. So maybe rationalization and denying would be dating someone, a type of person who treats you badly, maybe verbally, physically, emotionally abusive, and we deny it. And, we make rationalizations of why they do what they do. And this is just sometimes our defense mechanism to explain why we are where we are, because we're afraid to admit that we made a bad decision in either dating this person or getting involved with them. Sometimes repeating history, kind of the same thing we're doing with immigrants now that we did, over 100 years ago. If you want more information, check out the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. And it was based on 100% racism. And we're still doing that. And you'd think in our, 2021, in our thousands of years of being on this earth, at some point we would have come to a different conclusion, but we're still there and we're still growing, and hopefully we will get into a different mindset by not repeating history and moving forward. So anyway, if we resist all the efforts to regulate availability of some types of weapons, like maybe school shootings when it happened, my question to anybody who is all for guns, and I have no problem with guns at all, but why? Why do we need semi-automatic weapons? The whole point of them is for pure destruction. And if you say it's for your collection, what? Who's collecting that stuff? No. So these are questions we have where, there's a denial, and at some point you have to say, why are you rationalizing this? And why are you denying the fact that we don't need semi-automatic weapons? That's just a statement. That's a true fact. We don't need them right now, right? What? Anywho, so we excuse behavior of those we love, and we excuse the behaviors of those we love and identify with, and we actually only accuse those who disagree with us. Republicans and Democrats do it all the time. Both sides. I don't care who you are. Either side's blaming the other person because of what they truly want to say. I love this person. I believe with them, and their beliefs and stuff align with mine, so I'm totally going to do that. And I'm going to accuse those who don't believe as being the problem, whether you are conservative or liberal or whatever the hell. Everyone's always blaming someone else because they're not compromising and being empathetic on either side at all. And it's time that Democrats and Republicans take a good long look at themselves. Either side, doesn't matter. Everyone should take a good long look at themselves and go, where am I wrong in this? Okay. All right. So the good news is that sometimes we do take a good look at ourselves and what we're doing. So women now have a right to vote. All right. So women get a vote. Woohoo. Yay. All right. So we took some time and we're like, all right, women have a voice too. Here you go. All right. And now slavery is regarded as a human rights violation. Does it still happen? Absolutely, because we're human beings and we're all messed up. But at the most part, we're getting to a better place where we now see that it is a violation of human rights. Okay, so we're getting there. We're not totally there yet, but we're getting there. And now gay people are allowed to marry and openly serve in the military. So we're starting to see that human beings are human beings despite their sex, religion and beliefs. We're starting to really open it up to go, oh, gotcha. Okay, I'm starting to see now. All right, so what are some other examples you can see where we've actually taken a good hard look at ourselves and go, maybe I should change what I was thinking. Okay. So you can agree or disagree with this statement, but the greater the number of people who find any idea correct, the more the idea will seem correct. Okay. Sometimes that's good. Sometimes that's bad. All right. So you can agree to disagree. You can agree or disagree. It doesn't matter. It is a statement that is actually quite true. So what are some examples to which when more people start to see it as correct, it becomes correct? Well, slavery is obviously one of them, because there was a whole group of people at one point who believed slavery was good. And then we had to stop and go, okay, slavery is bad, my bad. But it became a group conscious throughout, right? It became, as more and more people believed it to be good and then more and more people realized that it was bad. Okay. All right. Some examples would be Nazis and ethnic cleansing. There was a whole group of people, and there had to be a whole group of people to have a certain belief in order for it to happen the way it did. Okay. All right. So another example would be the bystander effect, where there was at one point, there was 29 people who were watching a woman murdered in New York and nobody did anything. Wild, right? Because it's a group thing. And they also like group theory is another example where the whole group's doing it and you don't realize it, but you're going along with it without even thinking, right? So another way of looking at this, what do you call it? When the more people do it, the more people start to see it correct. So suicide clusters, you'll start to see those are going to start coming up as we get through the pandemic, as we move along in the next few years. Like the lookout point over on Skyway where people would just drive off. That's why I don't know if you knew this, but there would never used to be anything over there. There was never anything that would stop cars from going off, and it would go off. People just drive off. In fact, I had a friend from high school who did that. Thank God she survived. But yeah, it is suicide clusters is a thing, and it's like when more and more people do it, more and more people start partaking, and a lot of that happens with school shootings. I don't know if you noticed where there was a time where school shootings were like a huge thing all the time. Could also be media coverage. Sometimes that does influence it. It influences a lot. I don't know why they have to do so much, but anyway, that also creates a lot of clusters too. All right, so ostracizing the unpopular kids by everyone in class. Have you seen this happen? I have. In fact, I was ostracized. I cut my hair really short. My name was Kyle. And the reason why that was because I didn't fit into that social norm of female male because my hair was short. For some reason, that was it was in junior high. Kids are cruel in junior high. Junior high kids are terrible, so I don't teach junior high. But there's that example of where the group as a whole, everyone just kind of started partaking, and it became this thing where it was like I became the target for being ostracized, and it just is what it is. You can take a look on pages 408 and 409 for more examples on this. And then also groups of people protesting, whether it's the lockdown or for Black Lives, or the Capitol, whatever. Like, there becomes this group thing where everyone starts to partake. Now, everything that I had just listed is examples of conformity. All right. You're like, that's not conformity. Yes, it is. That is conformity, where you kind of conform with what others are doing. And the problem is conformity is the tendency to follow others uncritically without even questioning them. You just mindlessly go. And a lot of people who would storm the Capitol literally did it mindlessly. I don't know, everyone else was doing it. Like that was kind of their claim to fame, just conforming to it, right? So At its mildest, it's a way to gain acceptance to avoid conflict. So, students who were teasing me because my hair was short or whatever were just going with the flow because they didn't want to be on my end because it was brutal. They'd rather be on the side that weren't getting, rocks thrown at their heads. Yes, rocks were thrown at my heads. It was a fun time. So, anyway, that's just kind of how, conformity works, where people are afraid of being on the other end of it. So they will follow a certain group. So think of like a school of fish, right? Big old school of fish. They're just going with it because they don't want to be the one that the shark comes and gets, right? Though the irony of that is sharks actually will get fish in a group so they can take more of a bite. Hint, hint. So conformity is not always ideal because unfortunately it may not be the